And during this time, while you were interviewing Mrs. Beale in the station, how would you assess her state of mind?
I thought she seemed shocked, sir.
Crying? Hysterical?
No, sir. Quiet. Just very shocked and upset.
That'll be all. Thank you.
No questions, Your Honour.
Very well, Constable. You may step down.
I now call Mrs. Pauline Fowler.
Well, Dennis sort of shoved her at me and told me to look after her, and then off he went, so I took her indoors.
And then?
Well, I sat her down and I think I put a blanket round her shoulders because, well, she was in a cold sweat. I remember her hands were icy cold.
What about her clothes?
Oh, terrible. Her skirt was all ripped and her blouse was a bit torn and her hair was all over the place.
Did she tell you what had happened?
Well, she could hardly bring herself to say the words, but she told me, yes.
Can you remember her exact words?
Yes. She said Willmott-Brown raped her.
How was she, as she told you this?
I don't know. She wasn't screaming, just sort of sitting and shaking, and it was as though she'd fallen to pieces completely.
How would you describe Mrs. Beale's personality?
Before or after this happened?
Before all this happened.
Well, before. Cathy was one of the most cheerful, sensible people you could ever hope to meet. But since all this, well, she's changed completely. He's ruined her life and my brother's life. Well, it's affected the whole family.
All right, Mrs. Fowler. That will do.
Now then, Mrs. Beale's husband is, what relation to you exactly?
Oh, he's my twin brother.
Your twin brother?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Yes, they say that twins are very close. Would you say that was true of you and Mr. Beale?
Oh, definitely, yes.
Yeah, so you do anything for each other, I imagine.
Oh, yeah, well, we're like that, us Beales, you know. Any trouble, we all help each other out.
I see. Including, perhaps, concoct a story if you thought it necessary.
No.
Thank you, Mrs. Fowler. Those are all the questions I have.
No, that's not what I said. This is not a story. I'm telling the truth.
Thank you, Mrs. Fowler. Thank you for coming along. You may listen to the rest of the case from the public gallery, if you wish.
Your Honour, before moving on to forensic and medical evidence, I beg leave to ask the clerk to read out a written statement previously submitted to the committal proceedings, Walford Magistrates Court. The statement is from Mr. Dennis Watts, who is now believed to be deceased, if my learned colleague has no objection.
Yeah, no objections, Your Honour.
Very well. Read the court, Mr. Watts' evidence.
This is a statement made by Dennis Watts of number 47 Albert Square, East 20. The statement was taken down by Detective Inspector Gray of Walford CID in the presence of WPC Baxter at 10:30 a.m. on July the 8th, 1988. Last night, July the 7th, I worked as usual in the wine bar and shut up shop at midnight. Then I stood on the pavement outside the front, which is in Turpin Road, to get a breath of air, and spotted James Willmott-Brown running like a bat out of hell.
Your Honour, that is the case for the prosecution.
Your Honour, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I appear in this case on behalf of the defendant. I shall not keep you long. The prosecution's case has demonstrated far better than I ever could the weaknesses of the charge against my client. Now, I'm sure that once you've heard him speak and can judge for yourselves the kind of man he is, you'll see that what we've been hearing about over the last couple of days is a simple act of adultery, to which my client freely admits. I will show that the charge of rape was only later trumped up by Mrs. Beale in an attempt to appease an irate husband, and that my client has merely been the hapless victim of the Beales' marital problems. Thank you. Call James Willmott-Brown.
Take the book in your right hand and read the words on the card.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
So, whose idea was it to take the drinks upstairs?
It was mutual. Neither of us said anything. It was understood.
Because of the nature of the relationship?
Yes.
And how would you describe that relationship?
Warm, friendly. It was obvious we were both very attracted to each other.
And so this business of taking drinks upstairs after work, was it something that happened often?
Oh, good Lord, no. But on this particular occasion, with her husband away, we were able to.
Her husband was the jealous sort. was he?
Definitely.
And so what happened when you got upstairs?
We went into the sitting room. Kathy sat on the sofa, and she asked if I'd put some music on.
She asked, did she?
Yes, there was a record she wanted to hear.
Ah, this would be the Smoochy record that we heard about earlier, yes?
Yes.
And what happened then?
Oh, we talked for a bit, and I went to get the champagne.
And how did Mrs. Beale react to that?
The champagne? She seemed excited. She said she felt like getting a bit squiffy and letting her hair down for a change.
And how much did you both drink?
Well, we had the whiskey, and then we drank the champagne. But I'd say she drank considerably more than me.
And why was this?
Well, she was in that sort of a mood. Reckless, knocking it back, laughing a lot, you know. I think she probably had a bit too much, to tell the truth.
And now tell me, was there anything in particular about her behaviour that led you to believe that she'd had too much?
Yes, she became amorous.
And how could you tell that?
Oh, she was snuggling up, telling me how attractive she found me, how she preferred my company to people.
He's lying! He's lying through his teeth! Captain, let go!
Sit down and keep quiet on the public benches, please. If you can't restrain yourselves, I shall have to send you out, as I did yesterday. I think, Clark, we might break here for luncheon.
Rise.
Mr. Willmott-Brown, you'll bear with me, I hope, if I ask you a few questions of a rather more general nature. As a boy, did you have sisters?
No, I was an only child.
And is it true that from the age of 7 you were sent away to single-sex boarding schools until the age of 18?
Yes.
And then, as you've already told the court, you joined the army and went to Sandhurst?
Yes.
How old were you when you were married?
20.
And had you had many girlfriends before this?
No, she was my first girlfriend.
Mr. Wickham, is all this really necessary?
Your Honour, I have one further question in this direction.
Oh, well.
I merely wish to ask the witness whether he has had many women friends since his divorce 4 years ago.
No, I've been far too busy.
So you grew up and spent your early adult life almost exclusively in male company. You married the first girl that you met. The marriage was a failure, and since then you have avoided further entanglement. Mr. Willmott-Brown, I suggest that you are a man who has never had a successful relationship with a woman, so that when Mrs. Beale, who is a most attractive young woman, came into your employment, you developed a schoolboy crush on her. And when she repelled your advances, your resentment and your ignorance of the female sex, together with your sexual frustration, led you to rape her.
Very clever. But no. Absolutely no. I don't wish to appear crude, but frankly, she couldn't wait to get her knickers off.
You liar! What did you tell him the truth?
Sit down.
Mr. Willmott-Brown, in November of last year, that's almost 5 months after the alleged rape, you wrote Mrs. Beale 2 letters, I believe.
I did, yes.
In fact, we have these letters here. They can be read out if necessary. Would you like to confirm these are your letters?
They are, yes.
Exhibit C, Your Honour.
What was your purpose in writing these letters?
To persuade her to drop the case, obviously.
To let you off the hook?
No, to get her to cease sent. Look, I knew she was under pressure from her family. They didn't like me. They'd cooked up the charge between them.
Oh, come on.
I tried to point this out to her and explain that the case would do neither of us any good.
Did you offer her anything in the letters?
Well, certainly not.
Are you sure?
Well, I might have mentioned as an entirely separate issue that I had a friend in the retail trade who might be able to help her. Well, just as a friendly gesture.
Yes, I see. Did she reply to the letters?
No.
In December 1988, you again made contact with her.
Yes?
Which was, of course, strictly against your conditions of bail.
I see no reason to go into this. The police know all about it. I apologized afterwards. I admit it was a very silly thing to do, but I was desperate, that's all.
You phoned her up and asked her to meet you.
Yes. And we met in Michel Fowler's flat, but it was a trap, of course. She called the police. She wasn't going to listen to reason.
What did you say when you met her?
The same as in the letters. I tried to get her to drop the case. I wanted to find out why she was telling such lies when she knew I was innocent.
Oh, rubbish.
When she wouldn't listen, what did you do?
Oh, nothing. The police arrived and put a stop to things.
Before the police arrived, you said a moment ago you tried to get her to drop the case. How?
I don't know why we need to go into this.
Well, let the court be the judge of that, shall we? I ask again, how?
I suppose you mean the money.
Yes. Tell us about the money.
Well, I tried to give her some money towards her business.
Tried to give her some money. How much?
Well, look,
How much money did you offer her?
I've already admitted it was very foolish.
How much?
£3,000.
£3,000 in cash?
Yes, she needed capital. It was a loan.
Had she asked you for a loan?
Not exactly.
Had she or hadn't she?
No,
In
but...
fact, when you offered her help in your letters, she didn't even bother to reply, did she?
No.
Mr. Willmott-Brown, you broke your conditions of bail. You wrote, you phoned her up, you insisted on meeting a woman who you knew was taking you to court for allegedly raping her, and then you tried to force her to take £3,000 in cash, and you call this a business loan? I've never heard of a loan like that before, have you? I don't think loan is quite the right word for it. I think bribe would describe it more accurately, don't you? You deliberately came to Walford with the express purpose of bribing Mrs. Beale with a substantial sum of money, because you knew full well that you had raped her and that if the case came to court, you would be found guilty. I submit to the court that offering one's victim £3,000 in cash is not the action of an innocent man. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, let us, for the moment, set aside the evidence of the more minor witnesses. The written statement of Mr. Dennis Watts, school friend of Mr. Beale, now presumed dead in dubious circumstances. The evidence of Mrs. Pauline Fowler, twin sister to Mr. Beale, who has admitted to this court that she would say anything to protect her family. And let us also set aside the assertion that this was some kind of vendetta conducted by these people against my client, and let us instead concentrate our attentions on the Crown's witness-in-chief, Mrs. Catherine Beale. Now, what kind of a woman is she? A barmaid? An East End barrow girl? A woman who clearly dresses to attract men? A woman who has said in this court that she finds family life stifling? A woman who alleges that she has been raped, not once, but twice. A woman, moreover, who had an illegitimate child at the age of 14, whom she later refused to acknowledge, even when that child desperately needed her, and indeed, later, tragically, died. How do we feel about the evidence of such a woman?
We've lost Pete.
Is she to be...
I know, we might as well go home.
Members of the jury, may I also remind you once again that the case hinges on the question of consent. The fact that intercourse took place is not in dispute. You must address yourselves to the question simply, did she or did she not consent to intercourse? The defendant categorically maintains that she did. She equally categorically states that she did not. His word against hers. Hence your difficulty. I have already outlined to you those pieces of evidence to which I think you should pay special attention. For example, the absence of any signs of struggle, the fact that no one heard any cries for help. You must also take into account the testimony of witnesses that Mrs. Beale was in a state of acute shock after the event. There is also the question of the subsequent letters and visit by the defendant to Mrs. Beale, which culminated in his offering a considerable sum of money. You should ask yourselves what motive the accused man could have had, if he were innocent, to risk any such action which might be likely to place his whole case in jeopardy.
I don't know what we're waiting here for. Hey, go. I should never have got the police in the first place.
Nearly 2 hours they've been out now.
The whole thing's been biased in his favour from the start.
No, Kath, I think the judge is on your side.
Pauline, he wasn't.
What do you think then, Pete?
I don't know. Just don't know.
I agree with Mum. I think the judge was on your side, especially in the summing up.
Yeah, but he must have put both sides, Shell.
Except there ain't two sides. There's only the truth. That's what I told him.
Mr. Foreman, I want you to answer the question I'm about to ask you by just saying yes or no. Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict upon which you are all agreed?
Yes, sir.
Do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
And that is the verdict of you all?
It is.